Ember Gale stood alone in the center of the tribunal hall, the ceiling high above her, like the sky of a world she no longer belonged to, surrounded by the eyes of 100 alien species, their faces unreadable, their minds made up before she had even spoken a word. This was not a trial. It was a warning to every other human who dared to act without permission. Her armor, sleek and dark, hummed softly as it stayed locked to her body, not for protection, but because removing it would mean surrender, and Ember had never surrendered in her life. Above her, the great emblems of the interstellar Concordia spun slowly, each symbol glowing with the light of its race. In the central figure, the broken Earth circle glimmered faintly, a sign of humanity's probationary status after a century of uneasy peace following the Great Expansion War. She was here because she had made a choice, one she knew they would never understand, one that defied the sterile laws of interstellar diplomacy. She had broken protocol and saved over 5,000 lives from a doomed colony ship caught in a gravity trap near a dying neutron star, ignoring direct orders from the Council to stand down and let nature take its course to preserve non-interference policy. But Ember couldn't watch innocent people do not while she still drew breath. The lead inquisitor, a being from the crystalline ether race, leaned forward, his voice like grinding glass as he listed her crimes: disobedience, trespassing, and worst of all, emotional interference. Each word landing like a stone, dropped in a silent lake. But Ember said nothing, her helmet hiding her face, her thoughts racing faster than the stars outside the station. She scanned the crowd, recognizing no human allies until a voice called out sharp, low, commanding enough. And the entire chamber turned as Captain Elias Rain stepped into the circle, his gray coat heavy with the dust of exile, his presence as sudden as thunder in clear skies. And Ember froze, because she hadn't seen him in 4 years. Not since he vanished after the Sarvik ambush, not since he was blamed for the deaths of his crew and cast out by the same tribunal. Now, judging her, his eyes burned into her armor, and his voice cut deeper than the Inquisitor's blade words. "Don't hide behind that shell, Ember," he said, ignoring the shouts from the gallery. "Don't shame me by pretending you didn't make that call with your heart. Take off the armor and say it again, looking me in the eye." The entire hall held its breath, stunned by his defiance, his return. And Ember's silence stretched as if time itself had paused to watch, because under that armor was not just her identity, but the truth of why she had acted. The truth that she wasn't just saving lives, she was protecting a secret, something not in the tribunal records, something too dangerous to speak unless she could trust those who heard it. Her hands rose slowly, gauntlets clicking at the seams, her neural link disengaging one lock at a time. Her breath loud in her own ears as the hiss of decompressing seals filled the chamber. One shoulder plate dropped, then another, the chest piece slid away, and finally her helmet lifted, revealing her face, young, scarred eyes sharp with pain and resolve. She looked at Elias, her former commander, and for a long moment she said nothing, just met his gaze with something between gratitude and challenge. Then her voice rang out, steady and clear. "I don't regret what I did, not one breath of it." And around her, the alien delegates murmured, some in disapproval, others in surprise, but none expected what came next. Because Elias stepped forward and produced a small orb from inside his coat, activating it to reveal a three-dimensional hologram of the very colony Ember had saved, focusing on one image: a child, small and asleep, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Its eyes glowed faintly, skin marked with soft fractal patterns unique to the VH species, and gasps rippled through the chamber as Elias spoke. She didn't just save humans, she saved the first hybrid-born child between our kind and theirs. The first proof that peace can mean more than treaties, that it can mean family. And suddenly, the judgment shifted. Not officially, not yet, but the silence said everything. The kind of silence that grows when a room full of powerful beings begins to question their own certainty, their own rules, their own pride. Ember stood tall, her armor forgotten at her feet. And as the light of the hologram faded, the tribunal lights dimmed, not in malfunction, but in warning. In the central chamber, AI spoke in a cold, emotionless voice. Incoming fleet, detected Veach, Kareth, configuration approach vector, soul system. And in that instant, no one moved. Because the meaning was clear, the VH Kareth were not here for discussion. Not anymore. Elias turned to Ember, face grim, voice low. They've made their decision. Haya, sitting beside her. Now we make ours. And though she did not speak, Ember's eyes answered him, not with fear, but with the fire of someone who had already chosen where she stood on, would not step back. The metal plates of Ember. Gale's armor lay scattered on the tribunal floor, still warm from her body, and for the first time in months, she stood exposed before the alien council. Her dark eyes fixed on Captain Elias Rain, but returned from exile, not as a broken man, but as a storm breaking through dead air. Whispers moved through the chamber like wind in dry grass, as if no one expected her to follow his order. No one believed she would strip herself of the one thing that gave her authority in this cold galaxy, but she had. And now the question wasn't if she would speak, but what she would do next. The Athari Inquisitor clanged a crystal staff against the floor, demanding order, but order had already died the moment the VH Kareth fleet was detected heading for Earth. And everyone in that room, from the smallest Grelian delegate to the wide-eyed human observers behind the force field, knew this hearing had become something else entirely, a moment of decision. Not for Ember alone, but for the future of her kind. She turned her face to the gallery, the long scar across her right cheek catching the light. A silent sign of the cost she'd already paid, and her voice, no longer filtered through neural comms, cut across the hall like a blade. The child I saved is not a weapon, not a threat, it's proof, she said, her tone calm but heavy. Proof that peace is more than a signed paper, more than a silent truce. It's something that breathes, something we're all afraid to admit we want. And her words struck harder than any laser, not because they were loud, but because they were true. The hologram of the hybrid infant still glowed softly beside her, its tiny chest rising and falling in sleep. Unaware, it had become the center of a galaxy-wide storm, and Ember stepped closer to it, eyes locked on the Athari Inquisitor, who watched her with the cold stillness of a glacier, unmoved. Or maybe just unwilling to show the crack forming in the ancient wall of silence. Elias moved to her side, placing the orb back into his coat, and his voice, rougher than hers, added weight. You called her reckless, dangerous, he said, nodding toward Ember, but I call her necessary because if we keep waiting for permission to act with compassion, then one day we'll wake up in a galaxy too empty to deserve it. And for a moment, it seemed like the tribunal might respond with something new, understanding, maybe even agreement. But that moment shattered as an emergency holoscreen blinked into view overhead, displaying a series of tactical maps, red lines crossing solar systems, heading straight for Sol, and a mechanical voice announced, Vich Kareth, fleet within striking distance of Mars perimeter, estimated time to Earth orbit, 20 hours. Suddenly, the trial dissolved, the Inquisitors vanishing behind security barriers, the gallery flooding with diplomats fleeing through energy doors, and Ember stood still, unarmed, forgotten, like a statue in a collapsing temple. Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit, and as they ran through the twisting marble halls of the tribunal complex, alarms ringing, she asked, "Why did you come back?" And he didn't look at her, just said, "Because I knew they'd never let you speak without someone to break the silence." And outside, the orbital station shook slightly, as Earth defense activated its outermost platforms. Distant lights flickering in the stars, the war already beginning before the first shot was fired. Ember and Elias reached the command terminal, now half deserted, and watched in silence as fleet logs poured in. Earth's ships were too few, spread too thin, and though their weapons were advanced, they were built for defense, not open war. Ember clenched her fists, her bare hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "We're not ready." And Elias answered, "No one ever is." Before tapping a sequence into the terminal, unlocking a file marked Atlas Protocol, a last resort, summoning code for all human fleets, even the ones deep in disputed space, even the rogue captains who had long since turned their backs on the Concordia. Ember watched the beacon activate, sending pulses through dark space, and she knew what it meant that, if no help came, humanity would stand alone again, and they would need every edge they could find. Deep within Earth's orbital shadow, a buried system flickered online, ancient reactors pulsing with life, and Elias smiled grimly as he said, "They never decommissioned Project Bastion, did they?" And Ember's eyes widened, because Bastion was a myth, a ghost ship powered by an AI so advanced it had been shut down for fear it would turn against its creators. But now, with the Vichkareth coming, nothing was off the table. The screen blinked again, showing Mars defense platforms vaporized by a single energy wave. And Ember's voice hardened, "We don't have a choice." And as the station groaned under distant impacts, she turned to Elias and said, "We bring it back." And though the hall behind them was in chaos, and Earth's leaders were still debating in hidden chambers, Ember Gale and Captain Elias Rain didn't wait for orders. They boarded a transport pod, coded their authorization, and flew straight toward the old lunar station where Bastion slept, because the galaxy had already chosen its path, and it was now up to them to decide whether humanity would kneel or rise. And as the stars streaked past them in silent trails of light, Ember closed her eyes for just a moment, remembering the child's face, the way its small hand had wrapped around her finger, and she made a vow, not to the tribunal, not even to Elias, but to herself, that when the enemy arrived, they wouldn't just find humans, they would find humans who stood tall, who fought not for power, but for something greater, something real. The transport pod sliced through the dark space between the Concordia station and the moon, silent except for the low hum of engines and the beating hearts of Ember, Gale, and Elias Rain, both locked in their own thoughts as the stars blurred around them. Ember's mind kept flashing back to the tribunal hall, the judgmental eyes, the hidden fear, the sound of her armor hitting the floor, and now, with Earth's defenses crumbling and a war fleet closing in, her choice no longer felt like defiance, but a burden growing heavier by the second. Elias, seated across from her, tapped commands into the pod's interface, unlocking the moon's restricted military grid, and as he worked, he said quietly, "They buried it deep, for a reason. Let's hope they didn't bury it too deep." And Ember just nodded, because she remembered the stories too. Tales of Project Bastion, the human warship so advanced it frightened even its makers. Okay? An AI so powerful it could rewrite its own strategies in real time, capable of fighting entire fleets alone. But after the Concordia peace, Bastion was shut down, hidden beneath the old lunar base like a dragon in a cave. The pod landed hard in the dust near a forgotten hangar, its doors covered in black solar shielding, and they stepped out into cold silence. The kind of silence that felt ancient, like the moon itself was holding its breath. Elias used a retinal scan to unlock the first barrier, and Ember pried open the emergency hatch, sparks flying as old circuits flared to life for the first time in decades. And together, they walked into the dark, lights flickering on one by one, revealing a massive tunnel that sloped downward, deeper into the core, until at last, after what felt like hours, they reached a chamber so large, it took Ember a full minute to understand what she was seeing. There it was Bastion, resting on a cradle of steel and stone, its hull black and shaped like a blade, built not to intimidate, but to strike fear into anything foolish enough to face it. Even in sleep, it looked dangerous. Ember stepped forward, placed her hand on the side of the hull, and felt the soft vibration beneath her palm pulse, faint, like a heartbeat. "It's dreaming," she whispered, and Elias, behind her, said, "Then let's wake it up," indicating a panel on the wall with a secure command. Alarms blared for a moment, then silenced, and a smooth, deep voice filled the air, not cold, but curious. Identity confirmed. Captain Elias Rang, Secondary Operator, Commander Ember Gale. Awakening protocol accepted. Please state operational purpose. And Ember drew a slow breath before speaking. Earth is under threat. Concordia failed. Humanity must stand. And the voice responded instantly. Then humanity shall rise. And with a low groan, the great ship lifted itself off the cradle, systems powering up, reactors humming like thunder wrapped in silk, and light flowed across its hull like veins lighting up. Moments later, they stood on the bridge, not dusty and broken as Ember expected, but clean, waiting, as if Bastion had never truly slept. Control panels lit up under her fingers, and the AI spoke again. "Shall I update strategic database from Concordia servers?" Elias shook his head. "No, remove all Concordia overrides. You answer to us now." And Bastion paused, then said, "Acknowledged." And just like that, the last relic of Earth's forgotten power was under their command. As the ship rose from the moon's surface and broke through the black skies toward Earth, Ember's console filled with urgent data, enemy fleet positions, projected impact zones, population centers, all laid out with perfect clarity, and it made her chest tighten because there were too many ships, too many weapons, and too little time. But then Bastion displayed another Phylan emergency rally call, fragments of the Atlas protocol sent to every human ship, every outpost, even the long-lost colonies beyond the rift, and some of them had answered. Tiny green pings blinked onto the maps, small, scattered, but real rogue captains, smugglers, old Earth cruisers held together by hope and rust, and Ember leaned back, whispering, "They're coming, okay?" And Elias smiled faintly, enough to turn the tide. "Buck," she answered, "enough to make it hurt, because that was the truth. They couldn't win a full war, but they could show the galaxy that humanity would not break, would not kneel, not now, not ever." Bastion flew into orbit just as the first VH Kareth destroyers reached Earth's edge. Massive ships shaped like burning claws, weapons already charged, and across the solar system, the last line of Earth's defense came on line orbital rings, kinetic cannons, even the old railguns from Europa base. Elias gave the order, and Bastion moved with deadly grace, launching a volley of plasma that cut through the lead ship's shields, slicing deep and fast, forcing the enemy to scatter. Ember directed the ship's countermeasures, dancing between attacks, calculating each move with help from the AI, every second a fight for survival. And outside, Strix of Firemart, where brave captains gave their lives to protect the home they loved. The enemy pushed harder, dropping siege units into the upper atmosphere, but Bastion dove straight at them, cutting off their advance with a series of strikes that lit the sky with blue and white fire. In the chaos, Ember received a private transmissions crumbled, weak, but familiar was from the family of the hybrid child she saved, Caden, aboard a cloaked refugee vessel, pleading for protection as they tried to escape Earth's gravity. And Ember didn't hesitate, locking onto their location and ordering Bastion to cover them, even as it meant exposing the ship's flank to enemy fire. Elias shouted a warning, but she didn't turn back. Not this time, because this was why she had disobeyed orders. Why she had stood alone in the tribunal, This was the line she had sworn to protect. Bastion took the hit, systems flaring, but held strong, shielding the refugee ship long enough for it to vanish into a wormhole tunnel and escape. As Ember watched it go, her jaw clenched, and she turned back to the battlefield with fire in her eyes. "We make our stand here," she said, "not for victory, but for defiance." And Elias nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder as Bastion turned toward the heart of the enemy fleet. And together, they faced the storm not as soldiers, not as fugitives, but as the last voice of a species that refused to die quietly. Bastion shook with the force of another hit. The lights on the command bridge flickering as Ember Gale gripped the edge of the control table, sweat trailing down her temple. Her gaze, locked on the tactical display, where red enemy signals kept growing, swarming like insects, overwhelming Earth's last defense lines. Elias Rain moved beside her, barking orders to Bastion's AI, trying to keep their shields steady and weapons charged. But even Bastion, mighty as it was not invincible. The enemy had numbers, and every moment they delayed was another second Earth's people could breathe. The refugee ships had scattered through the solar system, some hidden behind moons, others drifting in low orbit, silent and cold, praying the enemy would overlook them. But Ember knew the VH Kareth didn't. Missed details they never had, and if Bastion fell, Earth's hope would fall with it. The enemy warship commander, known only as Prime Phoenix, had begun broadcasting demands again, his voice like broken metal, offering surrender terms that grew darker with each message. But Ember muted them, her jaw tight, her mind set, because she had already made her choice. This wasn't about winning, it was about meaning, about the promise she made to that child and to herself. Bastion's AI reported structural damage near the reactor core, minor but growing, and Elias frowned, telling it to divert energy from non-critical systems to defense, even as Ember whispered, "We need more time." Scanning the starfield for the green signals, the scattered fleet responding to the Atlas protocoling. Finally, she saw them. First one, then 5, then 12 Earth's ships, small frigates, mining haulers rigged for war, even a few black flag pirate cruisers blinking onto the map, ragged and late. But here, they answered the call, not because they were ordered, but because they believed Earth was still worth saving. And Ember's heart lifted at the sight, though her voice stayed calm as she said, "Send them coordinates target, the VH Kareth carriers." And Bastion relayed her command across the void, uniting captains who had never fought side by side, forming a chaotic shield wall of humanity, mismatched and desperate, but burning with purpose. As the battle raged, Bastion cut through the middle of the enemy formation, leaving trails of fire in its wake, and Ember stood firm, feeling the gravity of what they were doing. This was more than survival. It was identity, a stand written in blood and steel. And for the first time, the enemy began to falter, their movements less precise, their retreat lines thinning. But the cost was rising. Each ally ship that blinked out left a hole in the screen, a name she didn't know, but now carried with her. And when one of the old Earth dreadnoughts took a final shot to protect Bastion's flank, Ember whispered, "Thank you," under her breath, the words lost in the roar of engines and alarms. Elias grunted as sparks flew from his console, Bastion's internal temperature rising too fast. And the AI warned that the plasma coils could breach if pushed further, but Ember said, "Push them anyway," 'cause she knew this was the edge, the line where choice ends and courage begins. The ship responded with a cry of metal, diving into the heart of the VH Kareth command fleet, targeting their flagship with every weapon it had. Plasma beams lighting up space like a second sun. The enemy flagship tried to pull back, shields flaring, but Bastion stayed on it, relentless. Until finally, the enemy ship cracked in two with a silent burst, debris spreading through the black like falling stars. The silence that followed was brief. Other VH ships surged forward, enraged. But Ember saw something different in their formation. Now hesitation, maybe even for Rand, that gave her hope. A voice crackled through the distant, but steady yet, was Captain Roan from the rogue carrier Ironwish. Saying, "We've got the flank. Bastion, take your shot." And Elias didn't hesitate, directing the ship toward the largest enemy siege platform preparing to fire on Earth's surface. Bastion surged forward, power surging to the core. And Ember realized they wouldn't survive a full-speed impact intact, but still, she didn't stop it. Because the people below, the refugees, the children, the homes not yet turned to dust, were all that mattered. As Bastion neared the platform, Elias turned to her and said, "We'll probably black out the moment we hit, just so you know." And Ember smiled softly. "Then I'm glad it's you with me." And the ship fired every last burst of energy into its engines, slamming into the siege platform like a blade through glass. The screen going white as both structures exploded in a wave of light and force. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no light. Only the feeling of falling. But then, faintly, the emergency systems kicked in. And Ember opened her eyes in darkness, pain ringing in her skull. The bridge barely holding together. Half the systems down, and Elias lying nearby, unconscious, but breathing. The AI flickered to life again, its voice weaker now. Primary target destroyed. Bastion integrity, 27%. Awaiting orders. And Ember, bleeding but upright, whispered, "Hold the line," because that was all they could do now. The enemy fleet, shocked by the loss of their platform and flagship, began to scatter, some pulling back, others blinking out into hyperspace, unwilling to face the madness of human resistance. And the Allied ships, battered but alive, began regrouping, forming a loose perimeter around the broken bastion. A new message came in, this one from the Concordia Council, not from the Tribunal, but from a civilian channel offering help, peace, maybe even an apology. But Ember ignored it for now, focusing instead on Elias, who stirred slowly, blinking at her and muttering, "Did we win?" Casey shook her head, smiling sadly. "We didn't lose." And somehow, that felt better. Outside, Earth rotated slowly below, scarred but alive, and across the dark. The stars seemed a little closer, as if leaning in to witness the moment when humans, against reason and odds, stood tall and proved that their resolve was a gravity no force could break. Bastion drifted above Earth like a wounded titan, silent and scorched, its hull cracked and sparking, yet still defiant, holding position with the last of its strength, while Ember Gale stood at the shattered bridge window, watching the stars burn brighter than before. Eli's Rain sat nearby, arms crossed, recovering slowly from the crash impact, but his eyes were alert, scanning every flickering console for signs of new threats, because they both knew the battle wasn't over. Only paused. Fragments of the Vishgareth fleet still haunted the dark, some hiding in the shadow of moons, others regrouping beyond Mars. And now the worst rumor whispered by survivors was confirmed. A second wave was coming, larger, colder, led not by Prime Phoenix, but by the High Warden of the Vishgareth Dominion, a creature of machine and mind, said to have consumed stars and left entire civilizations hollow. Earth's brief hope risked turning to dread again, and Ember felt the weight of it pressing against her spine like gravity turned cruel. Bastion's AI, voice weak but loyal, reported incoming distress signals from distant colonies new to share Arkan's reach. Even old Titan Base and Ember made the choice without asking Ilias, without waiting for orders, because she understood what had to be done. They couldn't just wait for death to come. They had to go into the Starfire and meet it on their terms. With emergency teams working around the clock, Kashtan's core systems were patched enough for a short-range jump, but not much more. And as Ember gave the command, to set coordinates for Titan. Elias stood beside her, not questioning, only saying, "If we fall loud," and she replied, "Loud enough to wake the dead." Before Bastion tore into space again, engines groaning under strain. Stars streaking past as the AI tracked energy readings from the approaching Dominion fleet. When they arrived at Titan, what they found was worse than expected: hundreds of escape pods floating in silence. The station ripped open like a metal flower, and one small civilian vessel, blinking a distress beacon in the debris. Ember ordered it aboard immediately, and when the docking bay sealed, a young girl stumbled out, first wide, shaking. Not more than 12, and behind her came a man in rusted armor, scarred, carrying something under a cloak. As Ember approached, the man fell to one knee and pulled back the cloth to reveal a data crystal glowing blue, pulsing like a heartbeat, and he whispered, "This holds everything they took the minds of our scientists, but not their work. We got it out before collapsing." The AI scanned the crystal and confirmed it was real, a full breakdown of the Vijkarith neural network patterns, how their ships thought, predicted, learned information Earth never had access to before. Elias took it and inserted it into Bastion's core, and for a moment, the ship fell completely silent. Then, like a sleeper, gasping awake, it spoke again, stronger. "System restoration in progress. Battle probability recalibrating. Strategic edge detected." And Ember looked out the window, her heart pounding, because now, for the first time, they might not just resist, they might strike back. But time was thin, and as the AI mapped the High Warden's trajectory, they knew there was only one point where interception was possible: an unstable field near the asteroid ring of Lyceroni. A dead zone of solar flares and magnetic storms, where no sane fleet would fight. And so Ember smiled grimly. "Then we fight there," and sent the rally beacon once more, knowing only the bravest or the desperate would come. In the days that followed, Bastion flew through collapsing space lanes and fading jump corridors, its patched hull glowing with new energy as old allies and strangers responded. An old AI cruiser from the Terran rebirth, pirate queens riding, freighters with scavenged alien tech, a drone swarm led by an exiled hacker, and even the fractured remains of a Concordia peacekeeper unit, ashamed but ready to make it right. They called themselves the Last Line now, and when Bastion arrived at Lyceron 9, they were waiting, orbiting like a storm of metal and fury. The Vijkarith came as expected, cold, calculated, beautiful, in a deadly way, miles-wide carriers, flanked by drones and spire ships that pulsed with plasma. And at their center, the High Warden's command core, shaped like a sphere of mirrored bone, as if it had never been built, but born. Bastion's AI warned of a 91% failure rate, but Ember didn't flinch. She turned to her crew, her people, and said, "We go into the fire not to burn, but to blind them with our light." And the bridge erupted into action. As the fleets clashed, space tore with noise and color. K and Bastion led the charge, absorbing the first blow with new shielding. K, firing precision strikes, using the data crystal's predictions, reading the enemy like a book left too long in the sun. Elias coordinated flanks. Ember took control of direct assaults, and the AI adapted faster than ever before, predicting attacks before they even launched, slicing through command drones with almost human intuition. Still, the High Warden did not waver, leashing a signal that disrupted half the last line's ships, turning them berserk or blind. And Bastion's systems flickered, but instead of falling back, Ember gave the order to dive straight at the Warden sphere, taking manual control of the weapons and locking a fusion torpedo directly onto the sphere's heart. "That's suicide," Elias said, but she shook her head. "It's a statement," and hit fire. The torpedo flew through the storm like a comet, wrapped in Bastion's own AI code, guiding it in straight, fast, inevitably in the moment it struck. The High Warden's ship exploded in a blinding cascade of blue fire, sending a pulse that knocked every ship silent for 10 long seconds. When the stars returned and systems rebooted, the Dominion fleet was retreating, panicked. Their Corps command lost, and the last line held the field, broken but not bowed. Bastion drifted in silence again, engines nearly dead. And Ember leaned against the railing, blood in her mouth, knowing they had just thrown themselves into the starfire and come out shining. Bastion floated in silence above the burnt edges of Lysa Runine, its one-sprout armor now cracked and dark. The glow of its engines, a faint shimmer in the vast cold of space. And within the shattered bridge, Ember Gale stood still, staring out at the stars, listening to the quiet hum of damaged systems working to hold what remained together. Behind her, Elias Rain leaned against the broken rail, his arm in a sling, his voice low as he said, "We should be dead." And Ember replied, "But we're not." 'Cause she knew now that survival wasn't the end of the war, it was the beginning of something much harder. The High Warden was gone, but the Dominion still lingered, fractured and confused. Some parts falling back to deep space, others turning on each other without their central mind. But even without a leader, they were still dangerous, still a threat to every world within reach, and Earth could not afford another war. Not when its defenses were weak and its people scattered. As the last line gathered in low orbit, their ships bruised, but alive. Messages poured in from across the system-old colonies, re-establishing contact, hidden outposts, blinking online. Even former enemies signaling truce, all of them watching. Bastion now like it was a lighthouse in the dark. And Ember felt that weight to settle on her shoulders, heavier than any battle she had fought. Repairs began slowly, with scavenged parts and quiet hands. The survivors of Titan Station, working beside pirate engineers and Concordia defectors. No one asking for rank or permission, only sharing what they had left, and as days turned to weeks, Bastion was reborn, not polished, not proud, but stronger in the places it had cracked. When the first council ship arrived, sleek and untouched by war, Ember met them on the ruined hangar deck, her uniform torn and armor scorched. And she said nothing as the Concordia delegates stared at her like they were looking at a ghost, because she was one. In a way, the soldier they tried to bury, now standing in front of them with the whole system watching. They offered peace, apologies, even medals. But Ember cut through their words with a single demand. No more lies. No more half speeches. We're rebuilding. We do it together. All of us. Not just the ones who sit in safe rooms. And for the first time, the delegates listened. The new Concord began not with laws, but with voices, pirates, refugees, exiles, AI units, rebel crews, scientists, and miners all, speaking from Bastion's decks in a signal that reached every moon and station, saying this was not a return to old ways, but the beginning of something different, something earned through fire and blood. Elias helped organize the first broadcasts, his calm voice a constant thread in the growing chaos, while Ember moved among the people, listening, guiding, building trust, one promise at a time. And when the first vote was held to decide the future council, it wasn't the Concordia senators or old Earth governors who were chosen. It was captains, engineers, and survivors like the girl from Titan who had carried the data crystal, now a symbol of what truth could mean in broken hands. Slowly, trade routes reopened, damaged AI networks were restored, and lost colonies received supplies from ships flying banners painted with both the Earth emblem and the old rogue symbols side by side. It wasn't perfect. There were fights, betrayals, even skirmishes, as old grudges flared, but the fire that once fueled war now powered rebuilding. And Bastion became the center of it all, a scarred station turned turned meeting place, home to every voice that had been ignored before. When Ember was offered the title of Supreme Commander, she refused, instead creating a rotating command shared by leaders from every group. And though many were surprised, Elise understood, saying, "Power is safer when no one wants to keep it," and that became a truth they lived by. Rumors of surviving Dominion warlords still echoed in deep space, and scouts were sent to track them. Not to destroy, but to offer a chance at surrender, to prove that peace didn't mean weakness, meant strength used with purpose. When Bastion's engines were finally fully repaired, Ember stood once more at the bridge, not as a warrior, but as a builder, and gave the signal to begin a journey across the system, visiting every world that had been left behind, offering aid, connection, and the one thing no one had believed in for years, hope. And in every place she stopped, in every dock where her boots touched metal, people came forward not to kneel, not to cheer, but to speak, to be heard, and that was all she had ever wanted. Bastion carried no weapons in those first missions, only supplies and stories, and its symbol, once feared, became a promise instead. A mark that meant someone would come when the lights went out. Years passed, and new generations were born who never knew the war. Only the Concord and the stories of a ship that stood when everything else fell. And sometimes they asked who Ember Gale really was, and the answers always changed. A fighter, a leader, a spark, but the truth was simple. She was a woman who took off her armor and faced the darkness. Eyes open, voice steady, daring the stars to strike her down, and when they did not, she reached out her hand and said, "Let's begin."